Hello, YouTube. It is the 1st of July, so I will finally be able to release my first monthly review on this channel. I read 5 books this July and June, and today I'll be ranking them 1 through 5 from best to worst, or I'll probably rank them from worst to best. That makes more sense. But yeah, so let's just get straight into it. This book was the first book I read in July, and it was probably the worst one I read this month. It's not bad, but I just didn't quite like it as much as I thought I would. And that book is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. So, you know, I'm usually kind of a sci-fi guy, but this book just didn't quite click with me as some other sci-fi books had, and I felt that it was it was written a little bit weird. Like there was many mentions of the word fart, and the author mentioned kids like groins a lot, which is a little bit strange to me. But I thought this book had an interesting story, interesting setting, like with like the kids going sent off to battle school. But I think that Ender had it a little bit easy for him the entire book. Ender's the main character of this book, obviously, and I think the ending kind of I wasn't expecting it, but I don't know really how it sits with me because it was very anticlimactic. There was this big build up leading up to battle school, and there was maybe like 40, 50 pages left, and I'm like, how is this book supposed to end? And when I got there and the big plot twist happens, I just thought, is this it? Is this really like I read about 300 pages of this for just like for nothing really? I feel like it was just like kind of a cop out. And I understand how this people can see this, how people can enjoy this, but I don't understand how this could be regarded as like a sci-fi classic. But I mean, I guess, you know, it was one of the first ones to do such a thing like this. Like kind of like how books like Dune and Lord of the Rings and stuff, they set the groundwork for more books in their genre. But I just thought that this book was a little bit boring for me. I didn't really feel like I really wanted to pick it up because it was mostly just Ender and other kids at battle school like having shenanigans and stuff, and Ender getting bullied or whatever. I mean, there were some moments where I predicted something would happen, and it did happen, and it didn't. I didn't feel like accomplished like I usually would. I feel like, oh yeah, he went there, and yeah, I don't know. I rated this book 4 stars, but retrospectively, I probably should have rated it like 3.5. So that's where I'm gonna put it now, 3.5 stars out of 5. But oh, and yeah, the author of Ender's Game, he's a very problematic person. He had a lot of issues. I can't remember if he's alive or not, but he wasn't a very nice person when he was writing these books. So I have the other ones. I don't know if I'm gonna read them anytime soon because I'm currently on my journey to the Dark Tower of Stephen King. But I think that this book definitely was the worst book I read this month. Okay, this is book number 2 on my list, but the fourth best book I read this month was Carrie by Stephen King, the first of 3 Stephen King books that I have read this month. And I think Carrie was pretty interesting. You know, I've watched the movie before, and this is my first time reading the book. Obviously, Stephen King's first published work, and it shows. He was a lot more inexperienced at the time compared to some of his later works, which I will mention later in this video. But I feel like he kind of it was like the ending was all right. I feel like it was indifferent. Some of his endings can be really bad, but this one was pretty good. I think it was a decent ending, and I liked how like it was like a mosaic of like news articles and book snippets and actual story too, like with Carrie interacting with her mother, with her classmates at school, and there was like a scene with like a lawyer and stuff like that. But I think my favorite parts of this book were definitely like the actual story bits, and I could not wait to like actually get back to the story of this book. Once I would get into like a longer one of the book or the newspaper excerpts from this book, because I mean, if you know how the story goes, you'd understand why there was stories and like news reports about it. But I think that there wasn't enough actual like meat. Like this book's pretty small. It's like maybe like 300 pages, but I think that there wasn't enough actual like storytelling in here to really like wow me. Like, you know, it's a good story. It's like obviously it's like kind of like it's almost a classic now. But I feel like King just needed to focus on the actual like events of like between Carrie and her friends and her enemies and stuff like that, versus like the news. Some of it I understand is like a backstory that's necessary to understand some of the events happen in this book. like particularly the relationship between Carrie and her religious, overzealous mother. And I understand that, but I feel like they dragged it on a little bit too long, and they were a little bit gratuitous in a way, where it's like they went into extreme detail. But I feel like a little bit it would have been better left up to the imagination. I would have loved to imagine how Carrie had gotten to this point with her mother, like this relationship with her mother, instead of like Stephen King points out, this is exactly how it happened. This is exactly what events led up to the tension between them, and these are all the events that led up to the final maybe 100 pages of this book, which is it's very violent, and there's a lot of death. Yeah. If you know what happens, you know what I mean. But I would give Carrie 4 out of 5 stars. It was pretty good. It was great. It was kind of foundational for Stephen King. Like it was one of the earliest horror novels he wrote, or probably earliest one he published. But I think that it deserves a spot in his anthology. But I there's definitely better Stephen King out there. A couple of which I'm about to mention right now. So for the third book that I read in June, this one I actually finished yesterday. It is The Gunslinger by Stephen King, the first book in the Dark Tower, and I was a little bit apprehensive to read this one because I've seen so many people online say, "Oh, I didn't like The Gunslinger, but I liked the rest of the Dark Tower," and I was like, "Oh, I'm probably gonna hate it too. I'm probably gonna like, I can't believe I have to slog through this 250-page book to get to the real meat of the story." But no, it wasn't like that at all. It was actually a very enthralling story. It made a lot of sense. There were some bits of it that were a little bit confusing, but I assume that those will be explained later on as I continue on my journey to the Dark Tower. Which, by the way, if you know who he is, I'm following Jimmy Mango's like Guide to the Dark Tower. It's like 23 extended books in the Stephen King universe, and I'm currently reading the Drawing of the Three right now. So that will be on my July review, and eventually I'll do a Dark Tower review once I finish it all. But this book, like for it being so short, it managed to pack a lot of story there, a lot of backstory. I think there was 3 or so backstory like flashbacks that were like they were pretty long, like 20 pages each, and they gave us a good background on Roland, the main character of the story, the last gunslinger, and how he came to be there, what led him to be here, and what led him to pursue the Man in Black. Which I don't know if you know the first page of the book. It's probably one of the most famous lines in book history, maybe. But yeah, it's let me find it here. The Man in Black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. It just sets the tone so perfectly. It sticks you right in the action. Like it makes it sound like he's like chasing him, like running after him, and he's Man in Black's running away. But no, that's not the case. But it's still an enthralling like journey to reach the Man in Black. It's like you know when you're like playing with your cat and you have like the little dancer toy on the end of the wand, and you're always holding the little thing on the end of it out of the cat's reach. That's sort of what this book feels like. It's like tantalizing almost in a way. It's like you can see the Man in Black sometimes. You can see his traces, but you can never actually catch up to him until the very end. Which I mean, obviously, he's gonna catch him at the end. That's how books work. But yeah, there wasn't really much explaining about what the actual Dark Tower is. But I think as I'm going through Drawing the Three now, it definitely explains it a little bit better in that book. But I don't know. I thought this one was pretty good. I rated it better than Carrie. It was a 4 stars still, in my opinion, because it still had some flaws. Like the last maybe 50 pages, there was kind of like it was very confusing. I will admit there was a lot of like just technobabble in a way. Like they just talked about the universe and stuff, and this character just ranted on and on about it. But I think the first 200 pages of this book were magnificent, and I honestly did not want to stop reading this. So I finished this book in like 3 days. But and a lot of the time I was like working and like I was at like grad parties and stuff too, so I didn't really have time outside of my home time to read this. So I read this pretty fast. I mean, obviously it's a short book, but I thought it was very good. I thought it was very well put together. The prose is excellent. I found it very enthralling. I found it very easy to understand while also being like profound and deep. And just I'm very excited to finish the rest of the series. If this is supposedly the worst one, it's gonna be very good. The Dark Tower. I'm super excited. Okay, and now I have the third and final Stephen King book that I read this month. It's a chunker at all, right? It's Under the Dome. I have the nice hardcover here. I love this thing. It's so big. It's about 1,070 pages, and I read it in 10 days. So I think you can tell I enjoyed it, but like what did I enjoy about it? It was such an interesting concept. The first 200 pages is probably one of the greatest hooks I've ever read. It's just I expected sort of like introduction to the characters before the dome drop down, but you just get thrown right into the action. The first page of the book, the dome takes effect, and it goes until the last page. So the entire town is under the dome this entire time, and it's not so much about the actual dome. It's more about like the experiences of the people inside of it. There's about I think there's like maybe like 30 characters you get to know really well for this book. And some of them are terrifying, some of them are amazing, but they all act like you'd assume normal, like a lot of normal people would probably act like this in a crisis like this, like cut off from the rest of the world. There's no laws. It's just like everybody for themselves, like it's like anarchy, in a way, but they try and keep it organized. That doesn't last very long. But this book is just it's so jam packed. It never stopped moving. Like you'd think a 1,000-page book would be slow, but Stephen King has a way of making really long books go super fast. And like I remember one day, I started around page 300, I think, and I was just sitting outside reading, and time flew by so fast that it was like 9 p.m. and I was already on page like 650. Like I had just sat there reading 350 pages for a couple hours and I didn't even notice the passage of time. And it was like I was so enthralled in like the characters of this book and like the movings of this world that I just it was sucked out on my own. And that's the point of reading in a way. It's like it's escapism in a way. But this book is super good at just putting you in another place. Like it just put like you get it feels like you're a citizen of this town. It feels like you're like the third person watching all these things go down. I mean, obviously that's how it's written, but you always felt like you were another citizen in the town. And the events in this book were shocking, okay? Like, the things that happened in this book, I could never, like, if you had asked me to guess what would happen by the end of this book, I would never have been able to guess the ending of this book. And speaking of the ending of this book, I will admit I've seen people online talk about it. It is a little bit of a cop out, okay? But I kind of like it in a way. Like I think the way that the nature of the dome itself, how could you not have expected it to have the implications that the finale projects? Like how could you not have imagined it to like end like this, you know? It's not like some person in town did. It's just like, but yeah, I think I gave Under the Dome 5 stars because I don't think I've ever read. This is the longest book I've ever read, and I don't think I've ever been enthralled by a book like a long book this much, other than maybe one other one, which is 11/22/63, which I read in May. Sadly, couldn't put it on this list, but it's also my favorite Stephen King book. So I mean, but this one it just kept moving the entire time. I highly recommend this one. 5 stars, easy 5 stars. Okay, and for my number one book that I read this month, it's not a Stephen King book, believe it or not. We already did all three of those. It is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. I read this one because it was suggested to me by a YouTuber I watch. And honestly, I was just blown away by this. It's pretty long. I ordered it off Amazon and I wasn't expecting too much. I felt like I'm not as big of a fantasy reader as I am like maybe like horror or like science fiction. But this book just grabbed me and like did not let go. It was pedal to the metal the entire time. Like this book, it's a two character POV book. It has everything you could like possibly want from fantasy. Like there's like the school settings. It has like the ancient like rituals and magic. Like there's like the three tribes. It's kind of like Avatar, but like with one last bender. Like they have air, water, and fire. So they don't have earth, um, but yeah, this book just it was just so good. Like the idea is that it really talks about grief in a way that I've never seen before, and it talks about like how to deal with grief, how to keep your relationships, how to care for your family, like how to build a community. And something I found interesting is that the climax of this book happens about halfway through, and the first half of the book is you can see there's pretenses leading up to the events of the climax. But after the climax of this book, like the last third of the book, is mostly the characters trying to put their lives back together and like trying to fix up their community, trying to heal internally. And there's a lot of very powerful moments in that. Like there's this character who's very cold and shallow, but after after the climax in this book and a couple more, maybe like 100 pages more, of, like him talking to somebody else for a while. It's like I can't really say too much or else I'd spoil it. But he realizes that he has to come out of his shell and help his community because he's one of the most prominent figures, and he has to realize that him being afraid of facing the consequences of his actions isn't going to stop the consequences of his actions from affecting the people around him. It's just going to push the blame to everybody else. Like the rest of the village is going to feel it instead of him. But no leader should ever do that. Should ever push it off onto their constituents, their townspeople. But yeah, the book is just I love the two main characters in this book, the two POVs. They really like one of them more specifically, like the girl in this book. She portrays grief so well, and her backstory it was super enthralling. I could not put this book down. I read this on the way home from a road trip up north, and I read about pages like 250 through like 450 I think that day. It was only a 4 hour road trip, so I was cooking. Okay, this book, I could not put it down. I have to give this another 5 stars. I give it a lot of 5 stars, but I think that means that I just choose good books to read. But yeah, I think that this book is definitely a must read for anybody. It's super easy because it's a standalone. There's nothing else attached to it, and the characters are super lovable. If any of them were to die, I was super sad. I was like I did cry while reading this book. It was like the things that made me cry in this book, it wasn't the death of the characters that made me cry. It was the reactions of their family members and friends that made me cry because they realized that like it makes you really realize that other people are also impacted by the death. It's not just like someone dies and like they leave the world. They also leave behind their family and friends, and I think that's such a powerful message. And for an indie author like Emma Wong to do that, like self-published, I can't believe a publisher didn't pick up the story or something like that. But it was so beautifully written, and I just loved it. It was it was so good. So that is it for the month of June. I read 5 books this month, and I plan to read a lot more next month because I have a lot more free time this month. But I'm currently reading The Drawing of the Three right now, and then I will go to The Talisman and I think The Stand next. So I will update you guys on that. I will also have a review out for Dune eventually. I promise I'm working on it, okay? But yeah, thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, obviously, the usual spiel. And send me to your friends or whatever. I don't know. I don't care if you like my content. Just support me any way you can. Thank you.